Thank you for joining us on hashtag Tigray, our English program, where we come weekly every Sunday, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we discuss either work around the world for Tagalog diaspora, Tagalog youth, or as we are today and have been recently covering the ongoing state of Tigray, where we are unfortunately at day 265 of what is explicitly a genocide and war on the people of Tigray and the entire region. And if you're not familiar, Tigray, again, northern region of Ethiopia, facing a man-made famine and genocide at the hands of fascist Abiy Ahmed, illegitimate leader of Ethiopia, and Isaias Afwerki, illegitimate leader of Eritrea. So today, our guest is joining us from a tremendous organization called OMNA Tigray. I'd love to give you a chance to introduce yourself to our audience. Please let the audience know a little bit about yourself.
Hi, thank you for that introduction. My name is Yersalem Gurmai. I'm the CCO of OMNA Tigray, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan global organization that's focused on educated advocacy and the economic development of Tigray. Our organization is a direct result of the genocidal war waged on the people of Tigray on November 4th, and it's comprised of Tigrayan professionals from all walks of life for a common purpose, and that is to advocate for an end to the genocide happening in Tigray, to allow and ensure that unfettered humanitarian access is provided to the people of Tigray, and then onwards in the future for the economic development of Tigray.
Wow, that was a pretty great introduction in terms of giving the people an idea of who you are, what your organization is. I would like to give you actually a chance to give a little bit, if you could. I know most of Tagalog around the world are familiar, maybe even outside of our community as well, but I'd love to give them a little bit of a chance for clarification, whatever, a simple, short, concise explanation in terms of, what is OMNA's main goal? Like you stated it in there, but like just to reiterate for them, because I think there's a lot of confusion, propaganda that goes on around there in terms of what the activists, the people who are speaking up for victims of this genocide and famine are truly trying to do.
Yeah, so at its core, OMNA Tigray is trying to alleviate the suffering and any obstacles that have prevented Tigray from reaching its success. And a large part of what we do is utilizing educated advocacy. There has been a lot of intentional misinformation and disinformation about what's happening in the genocidal war against Tigray, particularly at the onset of the war when telecommunications was disrupted intentionally by the federal government. And so we're just trying to get the word out there, letting the general public understand who are Tigrayans. For the most part, I don't think most people outside of maybe like East Africa or the Ethiopian context understand Tigrayans as their own unique identity, or may not be knowledgeable of the other ethnic groups that make up Ethiopia as well. So first understanding like who we are as a people and making sure that the religions, the ethnicities, the culture that is part of Tigray is understood, and understanding why people must be involved to stop the genocide and why they should care.
Exactly. And that's something we've covered like on this program. I'm sure many programs that are focused on at least those that are concerned with the humanitarian civilians that are affected in this situation have covered in terms of a lot of what you said. So from the aspect of, telecommunications being deliberately manipulated, access to basic resources being restricted, and access to humanitarian aid being deliberately blocked and hindered. And then as well, something that you mentioned was specifically in terms of what I guess the goal is here is to bring attention and to provide access, right? Essentially, that's what you mentioned. And so I think that leads us specifically into what I wanted to discuss next. What is the current state of Tigray Tegaru in Ethiopia as a whole. So if you could give, let's say, someone even who is maybe a little bit experienced or informed on the situation, could you give them a little bit of background in terms of what are the people facing currently?
Oh, yeah, exactly. So kind of what I mentioned, what is happening to Tigrayans, not just in Tigray, but you can also see some of the ramifications of that, what's happening elsewhere, particularly in Addis Ababa, is a full-on genocide. There is an attempt at, and it's state-sponsored, and there's an attempt to eradicate the people of Tigray in part, and also basically implement conditions that will greatly affect their livelihoods. So you mentioned the hunger crisis and the humanitarian crisis. 5.2 million people are in need of aid, and 900,000 people are in famine conditions. And this is not because the food is not there, or, as people typically think with Africa, there's always some kind of famine as a result of just kind of like weather conditions and things like that. This is intentional obstruction of food, looting of livestock. The majority of Tigrayans in Tigray rely on agriculture. They're farmers. So there was an intentional, as I mentioned, looting of livestock. Crops were burned. Tools and seeds were planted, and the farming season was supposed to start months ago. And so we're all months behind. People have already died of starvation, and this is a problem that pretty much the entire international community can understand, and is largely being denied by the Ethiopian government, which has kind of stated that Tigrayans no longer sees Tigrayans as citizens of the state, but as an enemy of the state.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's this current state of Ethiopia, and their, essentially their position on their own citizens, Tigray, the region to the north. It seems as though something you mentioned, the propaganda specifically, we've mentioned that many a times, and the government of Ethiopia continues to contradict itself. It stated about, I want to say, a month and a half ago, we covered on this program where Abiy Ahmed, illegitimate leader of the country, stated 70% of farmers have planted their seeds and have been able to essentially begin the planting season that you stated. Much of the population relies on for food and also, money and income. So it's ironic for them to then come back a month later and state that this, humanitarian ceasefire, unilateral ceasefire is actually a humanitarian cause in order to help the people, when he stated there was no hunger. So I think it puts the people of Tigray in a difficult position from a world aspect in terms of how can the people of Tigray really get this aid? What can be done next? So I know over the past 9 months, 265 days, we have had protests, we've had social media campaigns driven by your organization, by many organizations as well, in order to try to be a voice for the voiceless, something that's been repeated over and over again, right? So my question to you is, what specifically is next that OMNA Tigray, that you yourself, maybe personally, but like specifically your organization first, we can talk about that. What is the next thing? What are we doing right now? What's occurring on the, to continue to help the people?
Yeah, so essentially, as you meant, there's been a lot of misinformation, disinformation, and with the telecommunications blackout, particularly in Tigray, the government can just spew any kinds of false propaganda and say it as fact. As you mentioned, there was a unilateral humanitarian ceasefire declared when a week prior, Abiy Ahmed said there was no hunger in Tigray whatsoever. So this is not something likely that the federal government will ever be truthful about. They understand and have heard reports of people dying on a daily basis from preventable causes. And particularly with hunger and starvation, it takes a while for someone to pass on a result of that. So just making sure and impeding humanitarian access is really problematic. So in terms of what OMNA Tigray is doing is just continuing on the call for educated advocacy. We have multiple teams on OMNA Tigray. And what we try to do is use our education, use our resources to make sure that what we kind of find is that once people know more, they'll tend to do more. So one of the things that we always do is like a monthly situation report where we say, like, what's the status of Tigray, what's happening in terms of the humanitarian access, in terms of, and then it being specific, like what's the healthcare like, what is the hunger situation like, what is happening with the weaponized SGBV. And then it's to call on the international community. So that includes NGOs, other humanitarian organizations, the international community, which includes politicians, includes the United Nations, to do more, because the knowledge is out there. And it's just making sure, like, you know, and one of the things that we do is we also like connect with Tigrayans in Tigray, like have access, we can share content and let people know that what we're saying, it's not just us saying it, it's people on the ground living it. So just making sure that everybody knows what's happening and that they will act upon them, challenging them to do so, because a lot of what we've heard for the past 265 days, we're now in our 9th month, is that a lot of condemnation, but the condemnation hasn't prevented the Ethiopian state from committing acts of genocide and continuing its genocide against Tigrayans, ethnic harassment, ethnic cleansing, and things like that. The Ethiopian government and its allies. So just holding people accountable and moving past condemnation. We really need action. We needed action 9 months ago, but we're unfortunately still at this point. So that's what we're doing.
Yeah, we are at day 265, as I stated a few times already. But I want to hammer home that point each and every time we have an episode here to discuss what's going on the ground. It's 265 days. You can't, explain really how long that is to not have access to basic resources, to be facing foreign forces in your own land at the hands of your own government, choosing to allow them to do what they want and where they want, essentially at their will. So I think what your organization is doing is great to be a voice for the people. Could you give them a little bit of maybe, I know you can't, it's hard to explain all of the, nuances of using your website. I'm sure you've made it as simple as possible, but could you give just, a small overview in terms of, hey, if you go onto our website, which we're going to post in the comment section here and has been at the bottom of the page as well, could you explain to them, like, when you get to this web page, here's where you go for this and here's where you go for that, just to kind of give someone who's a little bit apprehensive or not really trying to, jump at the, chance to do the test.
Okay. As much as our website is dedicated to the non-Tagaro community, it also is a great resource for the Tagaro community. And so when you go to omnatigray.org, so it's OMNA Tigray.org, you'll find a plethora of resources that you can share. And this could be to your neighbors, to your colleagues, your friends, your teachers. And you can also share these resources to your senators, representatives, anyone that you think can make an impactful change. So as I mentioned, before we do our monthly situation reports, we also had slide decks that help people understand the humanitarian crisis, that help them understand who the people of Tigray are, just so they can be better educated. Because as I mentioned before, for a lot of people, this is the first time they're ever hearing about Tigray and understanding what its significance is in the larger Ethiopian context. And then helping people really understand why this is not a typical humanitarian crisis. I think a lot of people, when we say, like, Tigray is the northernmost region of Ethiopia and East Africa and things like that, people just assume like war and conflict and hunger, starvation are just typical things that happen to Africa. It's not newsworthy necessarily, but what we have now is a full-blown genocide. So I encourage you guys to go on there to use the resources, educate yourselves, educate the people around you, educate your congressmen and women, And then also we do have calls to action. There's a dedicated section just for that. So if you wanted to donate or direct people to donate, we have organizations listed there that we personally don't accept any funds, but we have organizations we can recommend that are directly helping the people on the ground. And this could be helping Tigrayans both in Tigray and also the refugees in Sudan. As a result of this war, there's over 63,000 refugees in Sudan. And then there's also, Twitter campaigns. We have one now. It's called Annexing Tigray. It just launched at midnight Eastern Standard Time. And we encourage everybody to participate in that today. And it's basically talking about the illegal and violent annexation of parts of the western part of Tigray by Amhara forces. And they are largely responsible for the ethnic cleansing and the brutality happening to over hundreds of thousands of Tigrayans who are now displaced in Shire and elsewhere. And so we do have Twitter campaigns. We don't do daily Twitter campaigns. Our Twitter campaigns are very focused and targeted on a very specific call to action. And there's different people that we target. We make sure that we put a lot of education behind it. And we encourage people to participate in that as well. So those are just some call to actions. So it could be either donating resources to share and then also participating in our campaigns.
Perfect. I think that sums it up perfectly in terms of specifically your campaign that you're saying just began. The western parts of Tigray, Hamada, Maikadra, just to name two larger cities in that area, have been, when you state ethnic cleansing, I think it cannot even sum up what's occurring on the ground. It's atrocious how there are droves of people being driven out of their homes. There are people being pushed into rivers off of cliffs, if not executed beforehand. There are people whose houses have been taken over and they've been spray painted or painted in front, where people are essentially saying, you cannot live here any longer and this is our property now. From a humanitarian aspect, it is our moral obligation, not just as Tagaru, diaspora all over the world. These are our friends, our family, our people that look, speak, and talk like us. But for other people as well, this is something we cannot allow to be become commonplace around the world. This is setting a dangerous trend that you can do as you want and as you please, for the sake of a crusade that they're stating is for law and order, but you're taking homes from innocent civilians who have no political, have no military affiliation. These are innocent civilians. And
exactly. Kind of like what you were saying, a threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And so, ethnic cleansing is kind of the words used by Anthony Blinken, but we know it goes beyond that, and it is a genocide. But oftentimes the term genocide is politicized, so we'll see lots of people kind of refrain from using that kind of rhetoric. And we've seen, particularly in the west part of Tigray, we've heard reports of Tigrayan bodies being found in the Tikaza River. And we know that there's been intentional obstruction of food aid right now. Access is only kind of being provided through Afar. And obviously that's delaying the process. And what's happening is incredibly tragic, and the world should be doing a lot more. And this has been quoted as probably the world's worst hunger crisis in the last decade. And it's really turning into a catastrophe of huge proportions. So we're calling on people to do a lot more.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree. The government of Ethiopia, illegitimate government, is playing a game with people's lives, a game of propaganda, a game where, as you stated, restriction of humanitarian aid, but even humanitarian aid workers are being either persecuted, killed in the region, or being harassed while trying to enter the region. As of a few days ago, United Nations workers themselves in Bolo Airport in Addis Ababa, capital of Ethiopia, are testifying that they're being harassed in terms of they only have a minimal amount of money and medicine on them, and still being, accused, harassed of trying to help the so-called terrorists or junta in the region, when in fact, there are plenty of people that need this aid.
And that's a large part of that is because of the villainization that's been placed on humanitarian aid workers by the federal government. They've basically said, who knows if they're actually providing humanitarian assistance? Maybe they're providing weapons, and they can't be trusted. And because of this, we've seen like what subsequently happened is there's also been humanitarian workers that have been brutally killed and tormented. And the case that you just mentioned at Bole Airport, they talked about how the harassment and intimidation they faced by federal state police can inhibit people from feeling comfortable to go. And in the case with MSF workers, after the 3 brutal killings of MSF staff, 2 of which were Tigrayans, they've also decided to kind of pull back from some areas because of their safety. So this kind of dehumanization should not continue. And it kind of just shows how the Ethiopian government is allowed to act with impunity in its villainization of large groups of people. And they're not really being, called out for it.
Exactly. And I would not shy away from saying that that is, in fact, their goal, to intimidate and prevent potential people that want to help civilians on the grounds. They want to devastate, subjugate the people into submission. It's been clear what their agenda is. And, that's why we really have to push organizations like yours, OMNA, that is really making an effort to be a voice for civilians, something I've covered constantly on this program. There is a war occurring on the grounds, but there's a genocide that's occurring that we're trying to, one, obviously prevent the continuation of, but really we want to provide humanitarian aid, have an unhindered, unbiased, independent investigation into what's occurring. And by that does not mean just one side is investigated for culpability. It's all sides. But really, the people of Tigray are continuing to suffer during this game that they're playing. So I would like to give you an opportunity to just speak to, I think you've done a great job already kind of speaking to them in terms of how they can do so on your site or how they can do so in general. But what is your message to Tagaru all over the world, or to Tagaru youth specifically, in terms of what we need to do now? I know they can do it through your organization, but just in general, what is the next step in your opinion?
Yeah, I think after Mekelle and the majority of Tigray was liberated, I think a lot of the Tagaru community felt a sense of relief, a large sense of relief. But despite the liberation of the majority of Tigray, the situation on the ground, the fact is that it's worsening for our people back home. And with the humanitarian obstruction, with what's escalating now into probably a bigger conflict with forces from other ethnic regions being sent over to Tigray, and we see what usually comes after that is attacks and retaliatory attacks on Tigrayan civilians. The need for us to advocate for our people back home is greater than ever. There can't be any level of complacency, because it's really an attack on all things, all Tigrayans, and we've even seen it in the diaspora from some of the Ethiopian community, like just embracing, wearing a shirt that says, stop the war on Tigray, or embracing your ethnic identity and celebrating it, and you'll be met with disdain, sometimes threats of violence. So this is like beyond what's happening right now. And because of this war, even though it's been 9 months, we'll likely feel the effects of what happened for decades. So we all have to brace ourselves to be able and prepared and make ourselves available to help Tigray in understanding that, like, for the next couple of decades, like, this is our, it's honestly, in the diaspora, it's a privilege that we're able to do what we can and help the people back home who are not able, those that are unable to help themselves, largely because of an attack against the Tigrayan community. And as we see, like from Tigrayan students being suspended from, universities outside of Tigray, people playing Tigrinya music and having their businesses shut down in Addis Ababa. This is like really, it feels like the whole country has turned against us, and the international response has not been adequate at all. So one of the big things is, for our family members, our friends, the community back home, is that we have to largely rely on ourselves. So continue the fight against genocide. And one of the things that I've heard is, in modern history, there's never been a successful genocide in terms of a complete extermination of an ethnicity, and this is not going to be this is going to be the case also for Tigray. We are, with our advocacy, with the people on the ground, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that we maintain the preservation and preserve our ethnic group that is under collective threat from a bunch of forces, be it the Ethiopian government, Eritrean army, or Amhara militias, and now a bunch of other ethnic militias and armies that are coming to Tigray.
Wow. There's one thing I always say, and it's to avoid the hate speech, to avoid going in that direction, because it's hard to tell for an outsider, for someone even who is an insider but may not be involved with your conversation, who is in fact on the wrong side of things and who is actually just trying to speak for civilians. And when you engage in hate speech and directing animosity and frustration, that obviously during 265 days there's going to be that feeling in our community and in all communities, I would say, even throughout the country, as it's continued to kind of just enter a state of chaos, right? Mm-hmm. So I would say that what you said is right, spot on. And what we need to look forward to, as you stated, is the activism for our people. And as you said that it feels as though we're being isolated, and that's purposely done by the government, by fascist, illegitimate leader Abiy Ahmed. He's creating a situation where the people of Tigray are associated with one political entity. They're associated with one terrorist group, one junta. There's a reason he's doing this, because it creates him as their savior and works as he ends up being the one that's working against the junta. But really, it's the people of Tigray deciding that we cannot sit back while our mothers and our sisters are raped, our brothers, our fathers are killed because of potential affiliation with a political entity that still, this law and order operation, which was intended to track down, has either failed or was never a law and order operation to begin with, which we've stated again and again. And I think everything you said today was great. I want the people out there to share this, to repost this, as I state every week, because the goal is not views necessarily. More people see it, more people speak for Tigray, yes. But the goal is to be a voice for those on the grounds, the people who are in Western Tigray still suffering, the people in the shelters in Sudan, which have been reported on recently that the conditions are dire. There's not enough to help all of the people there. The shelter is inadequate, which is obviously going to be the case when there's just droves of people that have come there at once because they're driven out of their homes. They're running fear. And I think really what the goal is, like I stated, something that you said actually, in terms of we're fortunate to be able to speak for them because they're on the grounds now, right? And they're suffering at a state that's unimaginable. From outside forces to bombing in highly populated areas, droning in highly populated areas, mass killings, all things we've covered, things that you've said today as well. I don't need to continue on and on. It's clear what we've stated, and the resources are there as we stated. But we want to be a voice for them because it's our moral obligation. It's the obligation of people who aren't Tagaro as well, to look on the situation and say, despite what the genocide apologists are saying, these people are speaking and for the civilians. They keep saying civilians need humanitarian access. There seems to be no political game played here. Why is that being brought up continuously? So I hope that you can share this. I'm your host, Allah Wune. I thank you for joining us today on this program. I want to thank our guests for joining us today. I really appreciate your time and everything that your organization is doing.
And I was just going to say, I want to say, please visit omnatigray.org, participate in our campaign, Annexing Tigray, and make sure that you continue to participate in our campaigns. And you can follow us at OMNA Tigray on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook as well, and just so you can keep up to date with the latest happenings.
Until we meet again, I hope you share and post this and speak for our people. Thank you.
Thank you.